Jim says that case is now being investigated further by actual scientists with PhDs. He believes Idaho has seen a fair share of UFOs because we were downwind of nuclear testing in Nevada.
A lot of dust, a lot of dirt, a lot of radioactive waste floated right up into Idaho.
And they are just checking in to see how we've dealt with it.
This house was 6,000 feet from ground zero. Other homes that were closer were incinerated.
So you think that their aliens knew that we were testing nuclear bombs in Nevada back in the 50s?
Yes.
And so now they want to check it out to see what's still happening?
Right.
Okay.
They probably know more about the results of the nuclear tests than the U.S. government does.
In night vision video from a Navy destroyer, a mysterious flying triangle above the deck of the ship.
I said, well, sir, would you mind if we could do a quick walk and talk? He goes, yeah, I'll give you 45 seconds. So I figured, well, while I'm walking with Senator Reid, I'm going to ask him what was one of the more astonishing aspects of the phenomenon that they uncovered during this Pentagon UFO program. And right away, without hesitation, he goes, the fact that there are incursions over our nuclear missile facilities, nuclear armed facilities, that is of grave concern. That was a shocking aspect of the phenomenon.
Scenes typical of the American family at home. First floor living room. Children at play, unaware of approaching disaster.
Why would I make this up? Why would Major Florence J. Mansman, Dr. Major Florence J. Mansman, why would he make it up? What have we to gain? I've made no money from this. I've got nothing but pain and suffering out of talking about it. I've been harassed at my home. This was used against me partially in losing a job once in teaching. I've had a hell of a time after I've told this story, but I continue to tell the story because I think it's important for people to understand that this sort of shit goes on in the government.
Hello pals, welcome back to the channel. So this is a video I initially made a while ago, but it had loads of audio problems, a bit of copyright problems, so I've remastered it, replaced a lot of the clips, added a bit more information, because it's a topic which just will not go away. There's been lots of testimonies and podcasts and shows over the years that have hinted at the link between nuclear activity and UAP activity, but I think the Russian government and particularly the American government are well aware that there is an extremely strong correlation between the two. So I hope you enjoyed this video and let's get into it. So let's kick things off with a radiation awareness video from the 70s describing the effects of an atomic bomb.
In action. Now, to begin with, it may surprise you to know that radiation is something we all live with every day. It's always with us. Like each of our millions of stars, our own sun is a nuclear furnace that shoots out showers of tiny particles, along with invisible rays that we call radiation. In an average lifetime, a person might expect to accumulate radiation equal to about 10 Roentgens, not enough to affect his health. We don't worry about these small amounts of natural background radiation. To protect against higher radiation levels, we must do two things: keep our distance and shield ourselves. For as the amounts increase, so do the dangers. The amount of energy generated by a nuclear explosion is enormous. Near the crater area, there is almost total destruction from blast and heat. And now, large amounts of pulverized debris and molten earth are pulled up into the mushroom cloud. The radioactive atoms produced in the explosion join with the particles of earth and debris. The mushroom-shaped cloud forms and climbs higher. It now contains billions of highly radioactive particles. We call them fallout. The winds of the upper altitudes blow on the cloud, sending it in one or more directions. Some of the very light particles may remain suspended in the atmosphere for years and travel thousands of miles before landing. But the heavy particles drop to the ground within 24 hours. These are the most hazardous because they emit the largest amount of nuclear radiation.
Dangerous as it is, it certainly sounds like we've got it all figured out. Now watch this next video and bear in mind that between 50 and 100 Roentgens is harmful and 400 will give you radiation sickness and kill you. And this is what we used to eat our food of. Kind of gives you the idea that we don't always tinker with things that we fully understand.
Let's turn the Geiger counter here. So as you can hear, these are radioactive. Now this doesn't sound that bad, does it? That's because I have my gamma filter on here. If I take this off, it's a much different story. And the reason for that is because the type of radiation that is coming off of here. This filter is mainly designed to pick up on gamma radiation and to give you a dose rate based off of gamma radiation. And so it's going to block the majority of the radiation coming off of here, which is in the form of alpha and beta radiation. So alpha radiation is like a helium nuclei, like 2 protons and 2 neutrons flying off of this stuff all the time. Well, for billions of years. And then you also have electrons, which are beta particles flying off of here very fast. And they go about 6 feet in the air before they're stopped just by air molecules. So uranium has a half-life of about 4.5 billion years.
Bearing this in mind, it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that UFOs have taken a considerable interest in our tinkerings with the atom. Here's an excerpt from an interview James Fox did with Joe Rogan on his podcast, where he's talking about their involvement with the subject.
And I put together just like a 5 or 10 minute segment in the phenomenon, that connection. And you got all these like missile control launch officers and people at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Minot Air Force Base, talking about these incredible incursions. And keep in mind, you're talking about people that we entrusted with the securement and deployment of nuclear weapons, okay? So if these guys are lying, that's a problem. And if these guys are hallucinating when they've got nuclear weapons at their disposal, that's terrifying. And it's happening all over. I mean, I've got at least 15 or 20 of these guys testifying, and Robert Hastings got a bunch more. My point is, there does seem to be a connection.
James mentioning the incredible book UFOs and Nukes there by Robert Hastings, which I really, really recommend you read if you're interested in this subject. It goes into far more detail than I possibly could in any length documentary. Anyway, James talks about an interview next with Robert Salas, who had an incredible encounter at Malmstrom Air Force Base. So let's get back to that, followed by an interview with Robert himself telling his own account.
I interviewed this guy, Robert Salas. Robert Salas was Lieutenant Robert Salas, Launch Control Officer, United States Air Force, has this incredible encounter in Malmstrom, or his people do, and UFO sighted a disc, and then his nuke starts shutting down. He said to me, I'll never forget this, and this is like 2002, this is part of Out of the Blue. He goes, well, James, very calm. You could see why he was a launch control officer, very measured. Everything that came out of his mouth was calm and measured. He goes, well, James, the way I see it, it's kind of like taking matches out of the hands of a baby.
The event, the incident, I guess I call it, happened on the morning of March 16th, 1967. I was on duty along with my commander, Fred Mywald. We were both on duty at Oscar Flight, as part of the 498th Strategic Missile Squadron. There are 5 launch control facilities assigned to that particular squadron. Kilo Lima Mike November Oscar. Okay, here's Echo Echo Launch Control Facility is located some 30 miles north of Lewiston. Oscar was another 30 or 40 miles east of Lewiston. November, just south of Lewiston. We were at Oscar flight. It was still dark out. Of course, we're 60 feet underground, and there's no way we can see out. But as I recall, it was early in the morning, and I received a call from my topside security guard, who's the flight security controller. I think we call him FSC. And he said that he and some of the guards had been observing some strange lights flying around the site, around the launch control facility. And he said they were acting very unusual, just flying around. And I said, well, you mean UFO? I think I used that word. You mean like UFOs? And he said, well, he said he didn't know what they were, but they were lights. They were flying around, and they weren't airplanes. They weren't making any noise. They were not helicopters. They were making some very strange maneuvers, and he couldn't explain them. Well, I told him, you know, I just kind of shook my head and just said, well, call me if anything more important than that happens, you know, basically, and we just ended the conversation. It wasn't more than, well, within a few minutes, I'd say, maybe a half hour later. He calls back, and this time he's very frightened. I can tell by the tone of his voice. He's very shook up, and said, "Sir, there's a glowing red object hovering right outside the front gate." And I'll show you where the gate might be located. But where he's located, he's got a large picture window of the front gate. And he said, "I'm looking at it right now. It's a glowing red object. I've got all the men out here with their weapons drawn." And of course, he was all shook up while he was telling me this. He was very excited. I didn't know what to make of it, you know, but he wanted me to give him instructions or orders, tell him what to do. And I think I said something like, make sure the perimeter fence is secure. And then he said right away, he said, "I've got to go, sir. One of the guards has become injured." He hung up. I immediately went over to my commander, who was taking a nap. We have a little cot down there in a rest period. And I was telling him about the telephone call we just received. Then, and as I was relating this to him, our missiles started shutting down one by one. By shutting down, I meant they went into a no-go condition. No-go condition, meaning they could not be launched. So we get bells and whistles. We get a red light, no-go condition, and as I recall it at the time, it seemed like every one of them shut down. But later, in recalling this incident with my commander Mywald, he said he thought we only lost about maybe 7 or 8 of these weapons went down into a no-go condition. These weapons are Minuteman I missiles. These were, of course, nuclear tipped, nuclear warhead missiles. The weapons here. So they started shutting down, and immediately he gets up, and we both start querying the status board. We've got the ability to query and determine what the cause of the shutdowns were. As I recall, most of them were guidance and control system failures. And then he started reporting to the command post. And in the meantime, I called upstairs to find out what the status was of this object. And the guard said, "Well, the object has left. It just left at high speed." I asked him what the object looked like, and all he could say, there was general oval shape, but it was glowing red. It was glowing a reddish orange around the object, and it was generally oval shaped. But he said it was very hard to distinguish any features of it. So that's
how far away and what altitude was
well, he said it was hovering right over the fence, and to me, it's that would have been within about 30 feet away from him. The fence was maybe 8 feet high. There is another incident that happened just within a week of this, week after, where there were radar reports and quite a few more witnesses. The Air Force did an extensive investigation of the entire incident and was not able to come up with a probable cause for the shutdowns. And I've got quite a few witnesses that'll testify to that.
Here's another interview with Lieutenant Colonel Arneson doing exactly that.
The next thing that comes to mind is one that took place in 1967. I was in charge of the Communications Center at 28th Air Division at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. I was, again, the top secret control officer there. I dispatched all the nuclear launch authenticator to the SAC missile crews and whatnot, so I had a very good top secret background to go on. One night, or one day I should say, I happened to see a message that came through my communications center. There again, I cannot quote the date, where it came from, where it was going to, but I do recall reading it and saying that basically that a UFO was seen near missile silo numbers I can't recall, but it was hovering there, and it said that the crew going on duty and the crew coming off duty all saw the UFO just hovering in midair. It was a metallic circular object, and from what I understand, the missiles were all shut down. Since that time, a couple years ago, a friend of mine, Bob Kaminsky, a manager at Boeing, who has since passed away, in fact he passed away last year. On the Art Bell show one night, a guy by the name of Bob Sullis called in, and he was talking about this incident, and I said, interesting. He was talking about these missiles being shut down, and then later on that night, Bob Kaminsky, who had retired from Boeing, he called into the Art Bell show, and he said, yes, I was the manager, or I was the engineer assigned by Boeing to come up and check out the missiles to make certain that they in fact had not gone down upon their own. And he said, I gave him a complete bill of health. And I worked for Bob in Boeing, and he was a good friend of his. Even before he passed away, we had many, many conversations on the subject, and he was just a very incredible man. What I mean by missiles going down, they were not in a launch, they were in the missile silos, and they were being, I don't know what SAC does as far as activating a missile is concerned, but it's basically on a standby mode, so it can be launched. But when they say it went down, it means that it went dead. And something turned those missiles off, and so they could not be put in a mode of launching.
Another fascinating account is that of Mario Woods. Now, I'm not going to include his full report here, as it's a very long and intricate story, beginning with seeing a large orange orb, the same as we heard about at Malmstrom Air Force Base, but actually ending in an abduction story. So he's going to be doing an interview on the UAP Files podcast, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But there's lots of other interviews and books that he's done over the years, and I really recommend that you check them out in detail. Here's a brief overview of him describing his experience.
This is a drawing. This is where we pulled the vehicle to. And this is the fence line of the facility.
As you could see there, this had a very profound and certainly not positive effect on Mario's state of well-being and mental health. Now, the biggest problem with any UFO encounter to do with nuclear or radioactive topics is that it's completely blanket covered by the Atomic Secrets Act, which makes finding any account even harder than finding out about normal UFO encounters. Luckily, a few people have made inroads, James Fox being one of them. So let's get back to him as he talks a little bit about just how prolific an issue this is.
How many of them were there? How many different sightings were at these missile bases and in areas where they're testing nukes?
There are a lot of cases. I think cases in just about all the installations in the United States. I mean, Robert Hastings can. I mean, every
installation in the United States has cases.
I can't say that definitively.
But a lot of them do.
A lot of them.
And it would appear that it's not just the United States. The next clip is from UFO research legend George Knapp, as he tells about his fantastic adventure where he visited Russia and was allowed, certainly left with lots of their secret UFO cases, actually shedding more light on what the Americans were doing to research the topic than he'd found on home soil. But let's get to him. This encounter is fascinating, and it actually shows a sort of mirror side to what we heard about Malmstrom, whereas in that case the missiles were switched off. In this case from Russia, they were activated.
Maybe the other highlight for Sokolov was something he told us about, a very dramatic incident similar to Malmstrom. He said in October 4th of 1982, in what is now the Ukraine, near Yusovo, there's a Russian ICBM base, a nuclear missile base. These missiles are ready, primed, aimed at the US and at the UK, and they're ready to go. If it hits the fan, they're ready to go. So over a period of several hours in this base, UFOs appear, a gigantic UFO, and then much smaller UFOs. Some of them were in like constellations, some of them triangular. Big UFOs would split apart, then meld back together, zip around, perform incredible maneuvers. This went on for 4 hours. All of the witness reports, they're all Russian military officers, captain and above, captains and lieutenant colonels and things of that sort. They all had to file reports, and that would be interesting by itself because we've seen a lot of American cases where UFOs appear over nuclear missile bases, facilities, labs, things of that sort. This thing culminated with a very dramatic incident where the UFOs are over the base. Suddenly, the launch control officer, who's in charge of, in essence, pressing the button, says something entered launch control codes. All these lights on the launch control system light up. The codes, the proper codes are entered to enable these missiles. The missiles are ready to go, and they can't do anything to stop them. We are minutes away from World War III breaking out, and they can't stop it.
In 1982, a UFO hovered over a nuclear missile base in the Ukraine for hours. Unexplainably, codes were entered and the missiles were ready for launch until the UFO vanished.
And then suddenly UFO vanishes over the base, goes away, the launch control system goes back to normal, and they were flabbergasted.
March 1991, radar at the Leningrad airport detects first one, then two, then three unidentified objects hovering over a nuclear plant. From a dead stop, the UFO zipped away at 2,000 miles per hour. The Urals, 1976. A photographer clicks this shot and later provides a more detailed drawing.
This declassified document that I found is from Australia, which has a sighting from the 15th of July 1960, which talks about balls of light over a nuclear facility as investigated by the British military. After determining that it must be a UFO, they then decided to call it ball lightning. But there you go. I appreciate this is quite tricky to read, so I'm just going to attach this one in the description of the video at the bottom so you can have a good read for yourself. Just to briefly revisit the United States, it's worth mentioning the Trinity event with the book written by Jacques Vallée, where an oval-shaped craft crashed a week after the first atomic test in Trinity, New Mexico, and also Roswell, which occurred very, very close to where the US was storing its B-52 nuclear-capable bomber fleet, the one that would eventually drop on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But back to the UK, we've got our very own with the Rendlesham Forest case, a case wrapped in mystery that I really honestly can't get my head around. There's so many different events that happened, but James Fox again mentions that as part of his investigation.
I put 15, 20, 25. Let me give you another example. Joint Base, Rendlesham Forest, December 1980. It's a joint British-U.S. base It's called the Rendlesham Forest Incident. There was a landing, December 1980. You've got Jim Penniston, John Burroughs, and this guy Ed Kabansag, thinking that like something crashed in the forest or something. They went out to investigate, and there's an object sitting on the forest floor. It's a kind of like a triangular shaped object, and it's dark and it's warm to the touch, and they sat with it on the ground. Kabansag acted like as a relay between the base and where this object had sit on the ground. Jim Penniston took photographs of it. He had his log book. He wrote down the symbols that were on the craft, which were crazy. And then the deputy base commander, Colonel Charles Halt, I interviewed him. He had, because sightings can happen over a period of a week or more, a lot of times when you get these mass sightings. And even the deputy base commander, Colonel Charles Halt, became a witness. He was skeptical, and then he too became a witness. And he said that these objects, there's a recording of him while it's happening. It's out there in the ether. They were shooting beams of light down into the weapons storage area. That was December 1980. Phenomenal case, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. These are like the cases.
What did this object look like?
It was a triangular-shaped object, not that big. I don't know, maybe 6 feet high, and it was black, and he said it was warm to the touch, and it didn't make any sound, very little sound, and then it lifted off the forest floor, maneuvered up through the trees, and shot off at a high rate of speed. Now, these are people that are responsible for the security of our nuclear weapons saying this. The deputy base commander, Colonel Charles Halt, saying this. Gordon Williams, the general of the entire base, I interviewed him as well. He talks about how the fact that this got out, it was a memo that was written by Deputy Base Commander Colonel Charles Halt that leaked, and the whole story got out. But those are the cases that I'm talking about that represent that 5 or 10% core that cannot be explained away in conventional terms. Defy, after exhaustive research. I mean, Nick Pope talks about it at the MOD. He investigated it because it took place in England. He said there were radiation readings at the landing site.
Do these, the crafts that happened at the base, do they have photograph of these things?
Well, Jim Penniston says that he took photographs, and then they said the photographs didn't come out. That's what they told him.
So he took photographs to get developed, and then when they developed them, they said
that's what they said to him. Yes.
Yeah. So most likely they just said.
So then, one of the things that Colonel Charles Halt said, that the deputy base commander, is that a plane came in, and there was some unknown government U.S. agency. I know you guys are probably thinking I'm crazy now, but don't take it from me. I'm just telling you what they told me.
Okay.
Okay. That they came in and kind of sanitized the whole case. But that's a very good case, and it's one of the top cases that is extremely. It's been investigated in England. It's been investigated in the United States, and a lot of the witnesses have come forward on the record.
So let's change gears slightly and talk about some non-militarized UAP involvement with radioactive facilities. Here is a clip of the incredible Kevin Knuth, who's done some wonderful work into the science of UAP and given some fantastic conference talks at the SOL and SCU, to name but a few. Here he is discussing the Fukushima event and the UAP observations that were seen there.
So some of these seem to be technological vehicles. Some of them are still rather strange, and we don't understand what they all are. But the situation is not quite clear, because it appears that these the reaction times of UAP to events such as the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster, where you now have radiation released into the environment. UFOs were there the next day in the area, and so it only took 24 hours for them to get there. So they're not all, clearly they're not all coming in from interstellar space. They live here in some sense, you know, either in our solar system or on the planet.
Well, and the radiation aspect, I wasn't aware of Fukushima, but, you know, like Larry Hancock has documented this, and, you know, there was UFOs and Nukes, and so there have been a lot of different books, and like Lou Elizondo talked about this correlation. It's incredibly interesting, and it doesn't look like it's been that well explored yet, but every aspect of the nuclear supply chain, transportation, storage, medical facilities that use nuclear materials, it's amazing, the UFO correlation between those. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I first became aware of that through Robert Hastings' work.
Yeah, that was...
And the recent SCU study that shows the correlation between UFO sightings and nuclear facilities, even back to when they were being constructed, when the facilities were being constructed, before there was nuclear material there, you still had a high prevalence of UFO sightings, which is really interesting. So it points to some kind of surveillance or monitoring. It's clearly intelligent.
In fact, it's even weirder than that, as UFOs were spotted above the Fukushima plant days before the accident, which leads me to two trains of thought. Either the UAP is not limited to a linear form of time, as we are, or that they were so prevalent over nuclear facilities that they just happened to be there observing it prior to the catastrophe anyway.
But I think what you can be certain of is the monitoring surveillance. That's clearly going on.
Well, and if they live here, right? I mean, then maybe that message is, you know, hey, we live here too. Don't destroy the planet. I mean, it could be as simple as that.
Yeah, that could very well be the case. Yeah, we might find that we share this planet with somebody else who we're just not familiar with yet, and they may be very concerned about what we're doing.
It's for very good reason that we joke about rocket science being incredibly complicated, which leads us to our next case, that of Dr. Bob Jacobs. Bob was a photography expert working for the Air Force who was tasked with recording the launches of the Titan rocket platform, which could be used to deliver nuclear weapons. He set up a telescope 800 miles away from the launch site so he could capture video footage of the rockets launching from a side-on perspective and see in great detail if any faults were to occur or any erroneous behavior, and capturing footage very much like you're seeing here. In his account, he didn't see it with the naked eye because it was captured through a telescope, but a craft entered the shot a dummy warhead, so what looked very much like a nuclear missile, 3 times, knocking it out of the sky, and then left the picture. This is his account. Again, Bob's story is a fascinating one and is available in much longer form on things like the Disclosure Project and various other testimonies and interviews that he's done. For the sake of this not being a 4-hour interview, I've just got a very, very short version where he summarizes his experience whilst being challenged by Bill Nye, who was the Neil deGrasse Tyson of his time. Make of that what you will. Anyway, here it is.
I was officer in charge of optical instrumentation at Vandenberg Air Force Base from 1963 to 66.
That's
our job
California?
was to photograph. That's California, so right there on the coast. Right. And our job was to photograph with high-speed instrumentation every missile launch from Vandenberg going down the test range. They wanted to find out if we could figure out a place to put a telescope where we could get a side view of the missile so that we could see all 3 stages of powered flight. So I went up to Big Sur, California, up on a U.S. Forest Service road on Anderson Peak, and I installed a telescopic sight up there. The Air Force flew in a huge catadioptric telescope from the Cape. It was built by Dr. Walter Manning at Boston University. They put the telescope up there, and with that thing, which had a focal length of 2,500 inches, we photographed an Atlas missile raising up out of the fog cover and flying downrange. We got all 3 stages of powered flight, and as the dummy warhead and the package flew on down range, we were all celebrating the fact that we had seen the thing and accomplished the mission. When I got back to the base with the film the next day, I was called into the office of Major Florence J. Mansman, and there were 3 people in gray suits standing in there. There was a 16mm camera and a screen set up. Major Mansman said, "Lieutenant, sit down and watch this." And he turned down the lights, turned on the camera, on the projector, and the film came on. And I recognized it as the film that we'd shot at Big Sur the previous day. Toward the end of the flight, I was looking at Major Mansman saying, "Pretty good stuff, huh, sir?" And suddenly he said, "Just watch this." And as I watched, the warhead, the dummy warhead, the chaff that was put out in front of it as a decoy to deflect the Russian anti-missile tracking radar. Everything was flying along, and suddenly, in the same direction this stuff was flying at about 8,000 miles an hour, An object came into the frame, shot a beam of light at the warhead, flew up to the top, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew around the direction it was flying, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew down, shot another beam of light at the warhead, and flew out the same way it came in.
Well, I don't understand. Why didn't you see this when you were shooting it?
Well, it was 600 to 800 miles away from us.
Oh, I got you.
And
they confiscated.
Well, first of all, the Major Mansman said to me, "What was that? Were you guys screwing around up there?" I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Then tell me what that was." And I said, "We got a UFO." And he said, "Lieutenant, you are never to speak of this again. As far as you're concerned, this didn't happen." You mind if I speak, Mr. Comedian?
Go ahead.
I was there. I saw the film with my own eyes. I'm not lying. Why would I? I'm a university professor with a PhD and a lot of years of good, respectful research. So the guys from Ulster may not have seen the UFO, but they saw the results of it. I saw the damn thing on film with my own eyes, so don't call me a liar, and you weren't there. I was.
With all due respect, I'm not calling you a liar. It's just quite a step to say there's a film with remarkable images on it that the CIA confiscated.
Which I saw and which they did.
Yeah, which is quite a step from there to say it was definitely a spacecraft from another civilization. That's the leap that the skeptical community is reluctant to take.
Hey, pal, listen to me. I didn't say it was a spaceship from another civilization. I said it was something in the air that we couldn't identify. Therefore, it was an unidentified flying object. It was shaped like two saucers put together with a golf ball on top, and it fired a beam that we assumed was a plasma beam at a dummy warhead and knocked it out of space. Tell me what happened. Tell me who did that. Tell me in 1964 who had that technology, pal. Not us, and not the Russians, and nobody I know of.
There's an old joke in broadcasting.
Are you going to do this with baking soda and vinegar, Bill?
Oh, hold on. We're running out of time.
It's an old joke in broadcasting. Well, it's like trying to photograph a car wreck. At one time considered an impossible thing to do. If you send out a news crew, let's go shoot a car wreck, that was a joke. Well, now, routinely, on the nightly news, we see car wrecks. We see car wrecks on the freeway. We see car wrecks behind us.
Why was it a joke?
Because there didn't used to be a camera everywhere. There are millions and millions of cameras. There are billions of digital pictures taken every week.
You're not saying there are no UFOs. You're saying that haven't been proven.
I'm saying that it's quite a step to see something you don't know what it is in the sky, to say that there are alien spacecraft that are monitoring our nuclear weapons.
Dr. Jacobs.
Well, I understand that.
Now, so if you're questioning what he's seen...
No, well, I'm questioning the conclusion that the technology did not exist in 1964 to produce images on film that the CIA would want to confiscate.
If I may.
Well, in 1964, you were trying to figure out what girls were. I was in the service in a scientific capacity.
So, sir, you can attack me.
Get off your skeptic high horse, pal.
Well, it just doesn't.
You're attacking us. You're the one who's making ad hominem attacks and saying that's quite a step. You bet it's quite a step.
If I may.
One at a time, please. We got 2 minutes left.
The other former Air Force officer, retired Air Force officer involved in it, was charged with photo analysis of this film. Florence Mansman. He's now deceased.
Florence J. Mansman.
To his widow. I have correspondence, private correspondence between Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Mansman, actually. And 20 years later, they are marveling over what they saw. Mansman's professional assessment at Vandenberg in 1964 was that this was an extraterrestrial craft.
Okay, so he made that conclusion.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
And I can send you, I will give CNN, I'm trying to get the national media involved in this as much as possible. I will send anyone, any correspondent for any newspaper, any radio station, TV station, any scientist, any member of your group, all of the original documentation where these gentlemen are discussing the subject 20 years later.
We're going to do a lot more on this because we do a lot on UFOs. We thank you all for coming, and we thank Dr. Jacobs.
As I said, I really recommend you check out Bob's full account, particularly when he's not being challenged by the stigmatic debunkers of the day. It just shows how prevalent the stigma was back then, and showing that people placed within mainstream science and media to challenge the narrative is no new thing. Anyway, in the next clip, which I find absolutely hilarious, it features the wonderful Lou Elizondo, a man who was the head of ATIP on the UAP task force and has certainly had a career behind the curtain and in the know. But look at how uncomfortable he is with his question that he receives about the relationship between UAP and nuclear fleets. You can see the shock register on his face, and then he defaults to the classic technique of throwing out a compliment to buy time to think of an answer frenziedly in the back of his head. However, he does raise a very, very interesting point, as the vast presence of nuclear-capable vehicles on Earth are on the sea.
And several of these UFO sightings have been above secret nuclear weapons facilities. Almost every major nuclear power across the globe really has reported and declassified these sightings. You have talked extensively about the connection here, which might be helpful, I think, for some people to hear in advance of my next question, which is whether or not the U.S. government has considered utilizing nuclear-powered naval fleets to lure these kinds of things to further study them.
Wow. So first of all, Jackie, thank you for asking such a thoughtful question. Obviously, you've done some homework. And I also want to, by the way, thank you as a journalist for following this topic, because I know there's a lot of risk involved. And I also know there's been traditionally a lot of stigma and taboo associated with it. So I want to congratulate you for your courage and thank you and your audience for at least having this conversation. But secondly, yes, that is one of the concerns we have from a national security perspective, that there does seem to be some sort of congruency or some sort of intersection between these UAP or UFO sightings and our nuclear technology, whether it's nuclear propulsion, nuclear power and generation, or nuclear weapon systems. Furthermore, those same observations have been seen overseas in other countries. They too have had the same incidents. So that tells us this is a global issue. Now, in this country, we've had incidents where these UAPs have interfered and actually brought offline our nuclear capabilities. And I think to some, they would probably say, well, that's a sign that whatever this is something that is peaceful. But in the same context, we also have data suggesting that in other countries, these things have interfered with their nuclear technology and actually turned them on, put them online. So that is equally, for me, just as concerning. I think that there is certainly at this point enough data to demonstrate there is an interest in our nuclear technology, a potential to even interfere with that nuclear technology. And when you look at all these naval ships out there, let's take the Nimitz battle carrier fleet, for example. In some cases, you're talking about a nuclear footprint probably bigger than most cities. You have a nuclear-powered carrier with aircraft on board and then you have nuclear-powered destroyers. You have nuclear-powered submarines, some of those with nuclear weapons on board, or certainly nuclear capabilities. I'll just say that. So I think, yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise that maybe there is an increased interest in our capabilities as it relates to our nuclear technology, and the Navy is certainly not immune to that.
Now, I'm not going to give Lou too hard of a time here because I'm sure it's a very heavily classified subject, but he didn't really answer the question, as you may have noticed. However, in another interview, which I'm not going to bother chopping up and putting in, I'll just paraphrase it, he has mentioned that a very successful way of attracting UFOs is to have dummy nuclear missiles or transport trucks or sort of any simulated activity that would imply that nuclear resources and assets are being moved around tends to attract things in. The purpose of which he didn't go into, and I'm sure, as I said, it's a very secret subject. Also, I'm not really going to dwell on the more modern nuclear USO interactions and stuff like that, because there's tons of stuff about the Nimitz battle group, the Tic Tac, Ryan Graves' encounter, and all of that. I've also covered it in my USO video, which I recommend you check out if that's more interesting to you. But I did find this, which is a bit of an older account of interaction between a USO and UFO and coloured lights over an US battle group.
Sometime in late July, early August of 1952, as an ensign, I saw a bright light at the forward of the bow on the right-hand side, which would be the starboard side.
The ship was on a shakedown cruise near Gitmo, Cuba. And I was down below decks. It was maybe approximately 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, I think it was. And this buddy of mine, Vince, who's seen a bunch of men coming from the engine room compartment, running up topside on a ladder, said, "Red, why don't you go up there and see what's going on?" So I follow these guys up 3 or 4 decks up to the flight deck, and we were watching this little object, like a light, that was following our ship. And then it came out of the sky at us.
My friends called me to come outside, and we observed a bright light quite high in the sky. It looked like a star, but was much brighter. The light tracked at a high speed and came to a stop, altered direction, and accelerated to high speed, stopped again, and it proceeded across the sky in this manner until it disappeared into the moonlight.
These 3 men, Robert Coburn, Chester Gruzinski, and John Lawrence, all served on the USS FDR. But each man was assigned to the ship on different tours, in different years, and with different jobs. And yet each man saw the same thing sometime during his service, an unidentified flying object tracking the Navy aircraft carrier through the sky. Others stood with them and witnessed the same events, which occurred over a 10-year period. But there is no record of any sightings in the ship's logs, and attempts to find other eyewitnesses have failed.
I know that during September of '52, there were a series of incidents during Operation Mainbrace, which was a series of naval maneuvers, military maneuvers with other countries. And during those maneuvers, there were a number of UFO incidents reported, one occurring in connection with a fighter jet, which had been followed by an unidentified flying object.
Barry Greenwood is the research director of CAUSE, Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. He is also the co-author of the UFO Cover-Up. Greenwood has collected photographs of UFOs taken in 1952 from the deck of the flagship for Operation Mainbrace. They were taken aboard the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt.
On September 20th, a newspaper reporter was on the flight deck of the carrier. He had a color camera with him. And he said he turned down the flight deck and noticed a group of guys looking up into the sky. He ran down there and noticed a large spherical object hanging in the air. Everybody was looking at it, so he had his camera. He decided to take some shots. And when he ran the exposures, he said the object accelerated, took off at high speed, disappeared. They thought it was a balloon initially. So the brass called the various other ships in the area, asked about a balloon. Nobody launched a balloon. Nobody knows anything about it. They listed it as an unknown. Possible balloon, but nobody knows where it came from.
No, it's quite obvious that we had seen something. We don't know what it was. We knew that it couldn't be an airplane because an airplane could not start and stop. The rate of speed was too high, too fast for a helicopter, and it was too erratic a pattern track for a weather balloon.
Leon Treadwell also served on the USS FDR in the 1950s. He recalls a UFO encounter he witnessed, along with several other men, while on anchor watch in Rio de Janeiro.
2 ships, or appeared to be ships, one above the other, maybe about 200 or 300 feet separated the 2 of them, and the counter-rotating lights. And all of a sudden a fireball dropped between the upper ship to the lower ship. Nobody knew what the devil was going on. There was actual radar contact on these vehicles.
This painting depicts what Leon claims he and several other sailors saw on board the USS FDR that night.
Several officers and these are representatives of divisional departments. They couldn't believe what they were looking at. Everybody signed a release statement that nobody outside of CIC would say anything about this for at least 15 to 20 years.
The CIC, the Combat Information Center, is master control for any Navy aircraft carrier. Here is where radar, mapping, target searches, and operations are conducted.
We were just told to not say anything about this to anybody outside of Combat Information Center.
The commander down in Virginia, when I was discussing this with him, he was on the ship, he told me that I wasn't even supposed to mention this. I just ignored what he said. one of my desires in life is to find these other witnesses that were up on that flight deck with me witnessing this object as it came on top of the ship. There are a lot of times I wish that this would have never happened because all the aggravation has caused me. I had people that laughed and said they wouldn't believe me. Really? Yeah, I was there. I seen it. You weren't there. You don't know. You don't know what it was like.
Now, there's no real comfortable way to drop this in, but there seems to be one of the major theories that UFOs interact with our nuclear facilities as some sort of benevolent guardian, making sure that we don't burn ourselves with the matches, so to speak. But it's important to the discussion to include all aspects of it. And obviously they didn't intervene with Nagasaki or Hiroshima, nor did they with the tests in the South Pacific in Bikini. And it would appear that our modern take of history is a little bit blinded to this. So here's a little video just explaining in a little more detail what happened.
Today we have with us a man who has something very important to tell us. How we, as members of a community, may protect ourselves from radioactive fallout in case of a nuclear attack. Fred, you told me before about your experience. Now would you tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Well, Jack, I have been associated with the nuclear experiments for perhaps 10 to 15 years, both in Nevada and in the Pacific, and mostly with an eye toward the effects of nuclear experimentation on human life and other life, but mainly human life and building construction, with an eye toward protecting the American people from fallout.
Have you ever dreamed of living an idyllic existence under the waving coconut palms of a remote South Sea island? Of course you have. For ever since the onerous burden of civilization first began pressing its crown of thorns on the brow of romantic mankind, who has not wistfully envisioned a trip across the languorous Pacific to find a tiny, lovely, lost coral island, to abandon forever the rigors of organized society, to loaf and sleep and fish and swim lazily, peacefully, and happily on the bounty of a glorious tropical nature? Well, here we are on the morning of February 3rd, 1946, on this far-off Pacific paradise over 4,000 miles from San Francisco. Is that remote enough for you? It's less than 600 acres in area. Is that tiny enough for you? There are only 167 human beings here, 60 of them children, all deeply religious Christians, converted by adventurous New England missionaries generations ago. From the coconut palms, the pandanus, and breadfruit trees, they get food and the material for their dwellings, of which there are only 26. They depend on their own arts and crafts. They are proudly self-sufficient. They are astonishingly intelligent. They are a gentle and lovable people. They have boats, quaint outrigger canoes made of small pieces of strange woods, lashed together with fiber. Yes, life is simple and beautiful on Bikini Atoll, until today, February 3rd, 1946, when there enters into Bikini Lagoon a fateful thing, a grim, huge symbol of civilization in its most terrifying form. Arriving is Commodore Ben H. Wyatt, United States Navy, with a startling request. Will the people of Bikini abandon their paradise so that the United States can use it for a certain experiment with the fantastic, the incredible thing called the atomic bomb? And after long conferences, it is to King Judah in public meeting that Commodore Wyatt puts the direct question.
All right, now, James, will you tell them that the United States government now wants to attempt to turn this great destructive force into something good for mankind, and that these experiments here at Bikini are the first step in that direction?
Now, there's no real nice way to sugarcoat this, but contrary to what Fred and the nice propaganda video said, the inhabitants of the Bikini Islands were not evacuated. They were in fact told to stand on the beach and watch this fantastic display of technology, and then studied afterwards. They were exposed to the full fury of the radiation and fallout, and then studied by the American and British scientists as their population dwindled, suffered from radiation poisoning, had miscarriages, and obviously they were eating food from the sea, and it was all part of the research done into the atomic weapon. So yeah, this happened.
The biggest nuclear weapon the US detonated wasn't in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It was in the Marshall Islands. It was here in these atolls located halfway between Hawaii and Australia that the US detonated a weapon codenamed Castle Bravo, and it was
about 1,000 times the force of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
The Marshall Islands is mostly made up of atolls, which are ring-shaped coral reefs with a lagoon in the middle. And some of these atolls were still inhabited when the nuclear fallout dropped from the sky onto people's bodies.
My cousin Erosi, he was on top of a tree whenever the powder fell. He died when he was a teenager.
In fact, the US tested 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands, and the damage they caused was unthinkable.
Malformed babies, jellyfish babies, some people call them.
The long-term side effects are still hurting people to this day.
Cancer rates in the Marshall Islands, in the Marshallese community, are higher than the general population.
And after testing nuclear weapons on their islands, the US studied the Marshallese people without their consent.
The United States chose us to be guinea pigs to develop their weapons.
The US Army actually wasn't expecting the Castle Bravo explosion to be as big as it was. The materials used in the weapon actually fissioned in such a way that the bomb nearly tripled its yield and drastically expanded the blast radius.
Camera position, 50 miles at 10,000 feet.
And then there was the wind. It blew in a different direction than what the scientists expected, and carried nuclear fallout to nearby populated islands.
Even so, the winds were within the area of acceptable fallout.
That's the word they used, acceptable fallout.
On the atoll's upper islands, this H+5 to H+50 hour dosage ran from possibly 1,500 to 3,000 Roentgens, well above the lethal human dose.
The devastation was massive.
The frame size of the picture is 14 by 18 miles. The film is running at normal speed.
Do you all have any reason to believe that UAPs and or what may be behind them may intervene at some point to prevent nuclear holocaust or some large iniquity, for example, with Russia?
I personally don't have any evidence of that. We have a great deal of evidence that they didn't stop the testing of the first device, the use of it twice, and the subsequent testing by numerous nations on the Earth during that period of time. So I don't see why they would intervene otherwise. I don't have any evidence to point towards any kind of motive. I can't even identify who's behind the craft. So getting to their motives would be a very much longer stretch.
Yeah, I'll go even a little more pointed than that. Look, they did nothing. They didn't interfere with Chernobyl. They didn't interfere with Fukushima. They didn't interfere with the vaporization of 500,000 people during World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't interfere during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They didn't interfere right now in the Ukraine. So the question is there any evidence to substantiate that they're here to stop mankind from hurting ourselves? Well, they haven't stopped COVID. They haven't stopped climate change. They haven't stopped World War II, Korean War, or anything else, and they haven't stopped world hunger. So, it'd be nice if that was the case, but I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that. What I have seen is evidence to suggest of some sort of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance of our nuclear equities and technology. That we have seen. We've been able to substantiate that and the ability to interfere with it. But the question is, are they interfering it for good? Well, right now, there's no information to indicate that, at least not from my perspective.
Do you have it? Pretty grim listening to Lou there. But every single thing that he just mentioned is our fault and was caused by us as a species and the choices that we choose to make. And therefore, I think this ties into the religious aspect. The Quran, the Bible, Buddhism, all major religions seem to center upon this theory of free will being paramount to the human experience. that whether or not we're judged after we die or whatever, our choices whilst we're here on the planet are our own. Good or bad, our mistakes and lessons are ours to live by. I've certainly got a few scars from making mistakes as a child, and those lessons have stayed with me into adulthood. So perhaps by burning our fingers one or two times or doing dreadful things to each other, it will, as a species, alter our behaviour more than an intervention at that early stage would. I mean, for example, there's lots of biological weapons, cluster bombs, landmines, things like that that are illegal, and yet we still kind of sneakily do it and either blame medical research or selling it to allies. So perhaps being told what not to do wouldn't change our behaviour anyway. Something to think about. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.